part number 3 of the masterclass, Why Your Tracks Don't Sound Like the Pros. This particular chapter, we're going to dedicate it to 3 what we call technical elements of the music production process, which is the room acoustics, the mixing process, and the mastering. If you haven't done so, please check out in the description of this video the full playlist, including videos number 1 and video number 2. These are the ones that I suggest you watch first before moving along with this video. So in this aspect, we're going to have one of the guidelines I'm going to provide you with is that the music production process, as we are getting into the top of the pyramid, we have less flexibility to change anything that we should have changed or done differently at the bottom of the pyramid. So it's very emotional that we're getting into the top of the pyramid, where we are towards the end of the musical or the production process. But it's important to understand that everything that we covered so far in part number 1 and part number 2 will be the pillars for this particular section of the music production process to succeed. So having said that, we're going to dive into this. Thank you. Okay, our first element of this chapter, we're going to dedicate it to room acoustics. Room acoustic refers for this particular case, I'm talking about the room or which we're going to be using for mixing and mastering if we are doing that ourselves. It's important because any room has its own color from the sound perspective, provides a certain color based on the different resonances and all the sonic elements that compose that. Anything that's included in the room will have an effect on the sound. And just make sure you understand that there's no room acoustically perfect. We need to learn how to optimize it as much as we can, but also we may need also to do some more adjustment at the software level in order to do a final correction for doing that. For example, if you're going to be mixing in your garage, there's probably is going to need more work to work on that particular room to make it suitable for the acoustics needing for mixing than having a specific living room with carpets and I would say not square one and so forth. So the idea here is to identify what the issues of the room could be. We're going to look into what diagnostics we can have from indications that we can actually identify on those, and also what provisions we can have to make it better. And when we're talking about making better, we're going to start talking about some parameters or some attributes of the room that we'd like to maintain in a certain range. So first of all, there are 3 types of conditions in the room from the sound perspective that we need to consider. First of all, we're talking about the flat frequency response. What does it mean, flat frequency response? Means that if I'm the listener and if I were to put up a microphone where I'm sitting and I use my speaker to produce sound, it doesn't really matter which frequency I'm going to be using for that particular sound. Could be anywhere between 30 hertz over to 15,000 hertz. So across the whole frequency spectrum, we expect to see something which is called flat frequency, meaning that whenever we are putting up a sound with a certain frequency, on any given frequency, it will sound exactly the same across all the frequencies. That's what we call frequency. It means that we are not adding any color or any distortion of the frequencies that has been created from the speakers or from the monitors. So this is crucial because when we are looking at mixing, we are going to use a baseline, which is our ears. That is the most neutral perspective in order to make sure that we have the right judgments when we make adjustments or we are processing audio. So the other aspect of that is we need to be able to control the early reflections. Control reflection is something that can change dramatically the way that we perceive the sound. Early reflections is the sound that we perceive as listeners once has left the source of the sound and directly coming to our ears. So if we have a bigger room, the early reflections will travel based on the speed of sound, and we get the early reflections longer if the source of the sound is far away from us. If we are in a room where it's small, the early reflections will be probably instantaneous. And this is something that we need to consider as well. Now, there's another aspect of that which talks about the essence of the acoustics of the room. We try to reduce the decay time as much as we can across all frequencies. Remember, we talked about the flat frequencies that we perceive exactly the same flat curve as the source of the sound from our monitors without any coloration. Now we are looking at exactly the same frequency spectrum, and we would like that to be with a minimum decay time, meaning we need to be able to control the reverberation of the sound in the room, because that will provide a lot of distortion when we are making judgments in our audio processing during the mixing process. One of the parameters, or I would say the basic parameter in this case, that you will use in order to measure and diagnose that, it's called the RT60, reducing 60 decibels in 0.5 seconds or less. This is a good starting point for any type of rooms to avoid excessive reverberation. The elements that we're going to use, physical elements that we're going to use to manipulate or address potential issues with the early reflections, standing waves, reverberations, and all this type of effects in the sounds in the room are the absorbers, the diffusers, and the bass traps. It's important that you dig into these elements, and I will now guide you through how we actually identify the type of issues that we potentially could have in a certain room. One of the other things that I recommend you to do, I'm not saying that this is it's a must and something that will not work. If you have a room and you have dedicated that room for mixing or producing music, well, that's what you have. There's not much to do about it, but you have some choices that you can do, some separations or some work in order to make it work with regards to the geometry of the room. It will be great. There's a special rule that, first of all, we try to avoid perfect cubes in a room. Perfect cube means that the width, the height, and the length of the room are exactly the same, because of the issues that we talked about with regards to the early reflections, the reverberation, standing waves. The general rule of thumb that we have for that, if you were for an optimal design for these rooms, the recommendation is to go with what is called the rule 1, 1.6, and 2.6. What it means that if I'm defining one unit of a height of the room, I should build 1.6 value the width and 2.6 value would be basically the length of the room. That is something that has been optimized for this type of thing to prevent this type of effect of perfect cubes. As I said before, whatever you have, it's good. Try to consider that, but you have to go into address those potential issues you may have for something that is not perfect with regards to this rule. As we talked about diagnostics, we talked about flat frequency response and the early reflections and the RT60 measurements. This is something that you can measure physically in your room once you have adapted it for audio processing and mixing using a free powerful software which is called REW. You can download it, and this is something that will provide you with a very good understanding, a good detailed report about those elements that we talked about for room acoustics, so you're going to be able to address them. And basically, you will be able to have a diagnosis of what of those elements or those acoustic attributes you have. And also, what Calibrate Room will provide some guidelines as to what to use with regards to the physical elements for correction. So as I said before, there is no room that is perfectly acoustic, and it could be that even if you have done everything and you have put all the physical elements, diffusers, absorbers, and whatnot, you're not going to get perfect results in the RAW report. Okay, so the next step is which I use in my control room is to use acoustic correction software, which is a software that will measure the characteristics of sounds perceived in the observation point the listener is seated to do mixing. And there is a calibration of equalization that automatically the software does. It could be done in a plug-in mode, which you can do it inside your DAW as a plug-in or a standalone. Some ideas are like, for example, the ARC software by IK Multimedia that also provides some hardware devices that you can actually plug in. My recommendation is not to start with that and say, hey, I have a catastrophic room acoustic, I'm going to do the correction software, because the correction software cannot do miracles. You need to start with something that it's something reasonably well suited. And if you're going to go one step forward or basically going into minor corrections or finishing up, probably you want to use that. So check out this software correction software and use it in combination of all the elements that we talked about for room acoustic. The idea here is to it doesn't quite matter how good you're mixing. It doesn't quite matter how many plugins or how much knowledge you have on those plugins or how you use them. If you're not hearing, and this is what this title of this slide is about, what you can hear makes you sonically blind when making decisions. Okay, it doesn't really matter what you do. So that's why it's in the pyramid in the middle. After you have composed and you have arranged your music and you have recorded the music, make sure that when you get into the mixing room, you feel comfortable with that to avoid any surprises. Okay, now in the context of preparing the home studio, we talked about the room acoustics. And I think that the focus here would be you're going to be starting out your own home studio. I put together some sort of a reference budgetary elements here for what you actually would need it as a minimum in order to get started. And I think that some of you guys will find this useful. In no means this is something that it's a kind of a committed price or anything, but just to understand exactly where we're at, what type of things are needed for a home studio. Of course, from this budget, it goes only up, okay? Some of the things that are here, I recommend to use a little bit higher budget in order to not to upgrade some of the major things. Just for the guys that are in the mode of starting out or they really don't understand what they have at the moment, let's spend some time with this, and I can provide you with some recommendations. But if you look at this table, we see I put some approximate minimum cost for all the elements that will constitute a home studio. Looking at the computer audio interface, which is the sound card, the DAW, studio monitors in the range of $100 and $300. This is something that I personally recommend you to go beyond that. The studio monitors is not something that you're going to be able to upgrade. You need to be able to have good monitor from the beginning if you are serious about producing music. So even though that the budget is between 100 and 300, I strongly recommend to look farther that. And of course, my online course has a significant amount of information about what the recommendations are for mid-level studio monitors, and you can use, and you can check that out. You check the online course. The headphones you're going to be using probably for mixing, my preference is to use open can headphones such as the Sennheiser and some others similar. You're also going to need a good microphone. My recommendation is to go with a condenser microphone. You probably start with something a little bit more expensive that is here, but it's a great starting point, which is the probably in the sort of the Rode NT1 or similar. That will provide you a great starting point. Then you're going to need a MIDI controller, and as we talked about in the room acoustic, you're going to need some materials in order to constitute the acoustic corrections, the physical elements that we talked about before. Of course, good cables are relatively cheap, and I recommend you to use and to buy good cables. That will make all the difference when you're trying to record electric guitar, basses, looking into vocals and microphones. Spend a few dollars more and use cables that are good quality. Okay, let's get started with some mixing guidelines I want to pass on to you right now. So we covered a lot of ground with the previous steps and the music production process, and we got into the mixing step here. So if you've done everything right so far, following the music production pyramid, we are over here. Okay, we have covered all the other ones. And now we're going to provide some guidelines as to what to look for when we're doing mixing. Of course, my online course will provide very detailed analysis and process units, details on my recommendations, and also a full practical case of 2 hours mixing session for specific music that you want to check out also on that course. But for here, and I think that I thought it would be very good to provide some sort of overall tips about the mixing process. Let me, first of all, this is my own way of seeing things. This is my own process, how I actually organize my mixing session here. The first step that I go for is once I receive the project to be mixed, I start a process called the project organization. And the project organization means, specifically if you're having a lot of tracks that you need to go and mix, you need to be organized. You can find everything there, and you know exactly where everything is routed. So the minimum things you need to take care of this organization phase of the mix is, first of all, make sure that when you get all the individual tracks, make sure that you're organizing the tracks and being routed to the different buses. You may need buses for reverb or for the integration of several instruments into one, or some other effects that you're going to be using. So have that in mind. Think about what is the best way to deal with this, which elements we're going to be sharing the same type of reverb, so we're going to be putting that onto the same bus and so forth. Make sure that you have a what we call a mix bus, and also you have an out bus. The out bus is basically fed by the mix bus, but you can actually add more effects or audio processing there in case that you need to do some corrections. Besides that, if you have a project that has several type of instruments, I always organize that in what we call folders, instrument folders. So if we're talking about an orchestral arrangement, basically I will create a new folder which comprises of all the string sections, as one for the violins 1, violin 2, violas, cellos, and double basses. And all of them will go into one folder, and then I will route everything to what we call a string bus if I want to process all the tracks together into one single bus, as opposed to using the same effects or similar effects on each one of the instruments that will basically save a lot of resources. The same thing happens when I'm sending all these strings, instruments, or reverb sends over to a reverb send bus, and that's the way I organize that. So make sure that you have everything color-coded. Every type of instrument or instrument family should have its own color. They have to be routed the right thing. And one of the best, the things that you're going to do is you're going to start looking at the overall mix, how it sounds. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do typically is to take a listen of the everything as it is. I'm not going to change anything. All the faders, volume faders, are in 0 decibels. I'm not changing anything. You need to get started with this starting point. Everything is 0 decibel the way it was recorded. That's the way you should have it at a starting point. The mixing planning layout means that once you started looking at the different instruments routing, also you're going to start looking at the idea of how to do basic panning or initial panning of the instruments. If we're looking at like a 2-dimensional chart over here, if you have a set of instruments, when you're planning for panning, make sure that you're panning the instruments across the stereo field for the same frequency range, so that each one of those similar frequency instruments, they are not actually clashing in a certain spot of the stereo field. So I would put, for example, the hi-hats over here, and I have a strings synthesizers. I would put it over here. Very narrow stereo field for bass instruments, and I would put everything over here as close as possible as to 0. In any case, everything that goes into electric bass or any low register instruments, you shouldn't be panning that. Okay, so you're going to be panning the ones that are in the high frequencies and the mid frequencies. Once everything that's below 150 hertz, you're going to try to leave it as much as you can in the middle. Okay, so the first thing to do is try to experiment with the panning settings for each one of the instrument based on a graphic representation. You can actually take a piece of paper and lay out where the instrument will sit with regards to the frequency or the main frequency and the stereo field. So you're going to be able to map it out and then translate it over to in the mixing console. The third step I typically go is I produce what I call the rough mix. The rough mix is basically I'm trying to accommodate, after the panning, the instrument settings from the volume perspective to make it sound as best as I can. Meaning without any processing at all. Remember, this is only dry. It's a dry mix. No processing, no effects, no plugins, nothing. Everything is started off with 0 decibels. And now I'm going to start playing around with the volumes of this instrument to make it sound right based on the stereo panning field that I decided to have. Once I finalize doing just calibrating the volumes for each of the track to make it sound as good as possible, then I will look into the mix bus and will try to figure out where all those instruments are actually feeding this mix bus. I need to start the rough mix with no more than -6 decibels to start the mix. Okay, don't get it, of course, not beyond 0 decibels, but my recommendation is start to even lower than that you can basically mix at 32 beats, so it's no problem to have a rough mix peaking and around -7 or -8 decibels, but the maximum top should not exceed the peak on -6 decibels. It will give you some sort of a headroom for you to manipulate during the processing. Now, the next step is start audio processing. What I typically do, I start looking at each one of the instruments one by one. And in my head, I'm trying to figure out, before I start putting any plugins, I start understanding what the track needs, okay, before the plugins. Okay, it might need something different. There's no generic preset for any instrument. It's not that you come up with, okay, I have settings for the electric bass, and I will use that, because each mix is going to be different, and you want to make sure that you understand the needs for each particular instrument in the mix. So that's why you listen to the whole mix with that particular instrument, and then when you're doing the audio processing to understand exactly what the processing is doing to the track, yes, you're soloing that particular track, the instrument, and you optimize that. Once you finish that, obviously, you just unsolo that particular track and look into the context of the mix. Never mix an instrument or plan it out only by soloing that instrument, because sometimes those instruments sound very bad by its own, but actually they have what they need for the mix to be successful. So make sure that you do that and make the necessary corrections in the bass to accommodate the mix. And remember, when you're going into the mix, it's going to be, from my perspective, what I call an iteration process. You're going to start doing the audio processing, and we'll move on to the last of the instruments. And then once everything is actually processed, you're going to find out you have to do some accommodation of the previous audio processing you've done in the instrument track. The other thing that I recommend to do is something that I would typically do between the rough mix stage and the audio processing stage, is look in the rough mix, I look at the overall tonal balance I have in the mix bus. Okay, we cannot start mixing and do audio processing at the instrument level if we cannot actually accommodate a tonal balance that is adjusted and compatible with the type of sound we're after in that mix. That depends on the genre of the music, that depends on what you're after, and that's what your priorities are and what you're trying to get out of the mix. So when you do that, obviously after doing the audio processing, you will have to come back to the mix bus, and if you have done any equalization in the mix bus in order to make it work, you may have to do some accommodations because you have been doing audio processing the rest of the tracks. But the expectation is that you will not have to do a major thing because you're not changing significantly the profile of the overall song or the piece of music. You're only processing that. So you're going to be using more compression, you're going to be using more equalization just to compensate some of the stuff that you added, but not a major thing. So after the audio processing, what you're going to do is, and this is crucial, and this is where 90% of the people doing mix fail with regards to not considering to put a reference track into the mix to consider along the way when you're doing the mix. Reference track is a track that you have defined to be representative of the type of mix you would like to have. It's a commercial track available. You can download any type of track you want from any source. You feel that this is the sound you're after. It's very important that you define that, because sometimes when we're doing mix, we lose control exactly how the mix should sound like eventually. And the reference track put us back on earth. And you will find that you've been mixing something after the audio processing, that the overall tonal balance or the tonal or the overall punch that mix has, or the stereo field that you have is not suitable with the type of mix you were after based on that reference track. So my recommendation is to go into add a reference track in your DAW and route it directly to the outbus. And when you do that, basically you can compare at the outbus level in between the two, the mix that you have and the reference track, because they go all through the outbus. And of course, you're going to use your ears about that. You're going to diagnose exactly how your mix sound like with regards to anything that has to do with dynamics and stereo field and everything else. But also, if you would like to have more in-depth about certain resonances or anything on the tonal balance, use analyzers or frequency analyzers such as the Voxengo Span, for example, which is a free software. Actually, it's a free plugin you can use. You plug it into your outbus, and then you can play back your mix, understand what the tonal profile has, and then you can do the same with the reference track and understand the difference. The most important thing is once you get familiar with how the tonal balance sound like, you're going to need less and less that tool in order to tell you exactly how the profile looks like. But this is crucial, I would say crucial in order to succeed, to have a reference track. I would put it pretty much at the beginning of the mix, but you can actually put it in the middle of the audio processing you're doing in the mix. The last thing I typically do is look at the macro dynamics. Okay, we have this rough mix, we have processed all the tracks, and now we would like to fine-tune the different volumes of the different tracks to make it stand for the needs of the specific situations and conditions and phases and passages of the songs. For example, if I need a guitar that was comping in the verse, now the same guitar is actually doing a solo there. Obviously, I will have to automate volume in order to make it stand out, and I will change that. So dealing with microdynamics means that maybe in different passage across the song, I will have to manipulate the different volumes of the different tracks in order to. This is, of course, is something very minimal. Make sure you're not doing drastic changes in volume. It's just very little automation in the volume, just to make it fit exactly as you want it to sound. And of course, my preference is not to do any automations on volume on the mix bus. Don't do that, because essentially even at minus, or I would say 0.5 decibels change in the mix bus, I can feel it, and everyone can feel it. And it's something that I would not recommend to do. If there's anything that needs to be done with regards to overall volume, this is something that I will leave it up to in the mastering phase. This was the mixing guidelines I want to share with you. I think the process that I described to you is a process that I used myself for several years, and I've been reshaping and improving it. It's something that provided me with very good results in terms of the process flow, how I actually go about doing in general. If you want to check out more details about what to do exactly in the mixing process for each one of the processes or the steps that I talked to you about, the online course that I gave that provide you a tons of information about process units, and also will provide you about 2 hours of a video which I demonstrate in concrete terms how I actually address a mix from scratch. But going through I would like to also to provide you a mastering guidelines in general. Mastering is essentially the process in taking the mix and put it into enhanced level to be able to compete commercially with the other rest of the music available in the market. There are several aspects of that, and we're going to talk about the guidelines as to what are the criteria we're using for mastering. The mastering is typically done separately from the mix because it has a separate mindset. We are looking at things differently that the mixing engineer has, even though that if we are talking about the DIY musician, he probably is going to be doing mixing and mastering by himself, and it's okay. Sometimes it's good to have some sort of an objective approach and not being involved in the mixing process, have someone else doing the mastering process. But if you need to do mastering to a client or you're yourself, make sure that you have the guidelines right in terms of that. So I would like to talk about first the main processes that I'm using. Again, this is something that is being used for most of the professional stages that are being used for commercial music. First of all, and this is the process that I also used and I've been optimizing throughout the years. We are talking about the mix preparation, which is cleaning, correction, analysis. First of all, I just play back the mix, making sure that I'm removing everything that has to do with noises and doing some corrections and analysis and try to understand exactly the tonality or the general frequency spectrum that I have for that particular mix and my overall impression to that. This is very crucial to look at this even before start doing anything. Try to get an own impression about what you hear in the mix and try to get in your own head what you think exactly it's needed in the mastering phase to move forward. Not all the process requires the same. By the way, this process that I'm using, it doesn't really mean that I'm using all this process. It means that it's in my toolbox and I can actually look into those in case that I need it. Start looking into what I call the pre-equalization. I look at the problematic areas of the mix, probably some of the resonances. You can use some plugins for that to identify the resonances. You can get familiar with the frequency spectrum, understand what the resonances are, and playing around with the equalizer, you can catch those resonances and avoid them. Or in general terms, whether the mix could be a little bit bass heavy or too much treble, or something that it's the mid-range is too problematic and so forth. So we're trying to do some sort of pre-equalization. This is not going to be the polished one. It's going to be the starting point. And also I'm going to start looking into peak compression at the beginning. I like to make sure that I'm getting a competitive mix even at the beginning by depleting all the peaks that I have. Typically, what I would do is a combination between a peak compression, we're using a typical compressor, or I will use a clip compression system, which actually takes only the peaks without actually compressing the signal, which is very good because you can get a lot of headroom back even without compressing the signal. But if you're doing it too much, basically you will get distortion. So it's a combination of them and depends on how much compression is needed at that level. I would typically use more a combination of them at lower level. It's better to use two process units, very, very subtle, than try to use one unit and put it on a lot of compression going on and depleting the dynamic range so much. After that, typically most of the mixes will require, and of course depends on the genre they're using, a little bit of harmonic enhancement. Harmonic enhancement is in what we call in familiar terms of what we're using a little bit of saturation, which is the additional of harmonic content in the frequency spectrum to have a way to get more body, more warmth in the mix. And this is something that if you compare the two, the before and the after the saturation, if you do it very softly, you will find that it starts sounding like a record because the saturation provides all the type of harmonic that makes human ear be happy. Use it with very caution about that in the mastering because we are talking about the full mix track. Too much saturation will create a mess and will destroy the mix. So the first question is, do you need saturation? Depends on the genre of music. And secondly, how much you need and in which range of frequency you're going to apply the saturation. You can apply saturation in the low end or in the mid range or in the high end. And this is something that you need to decide based on that. Then after that, obviously, because we manipulated the frequencies and the harmonic saturations and And the compression that we use, I typically will run into a post-equalization, which is it's more like a subtract equalization and polish equalization. I would look into the areas that I know that I can enhance that. If I need a little bit more air, I will do it. If I need a little bit more crisp, I will probably boost a little bit of 7 kHz or something of that sort. If I need a little more bottom end of that, I will do that. And if I have a lot of too much boxy material around 120, 150 hertz, I will do that. So it's this kind of further compensation. This is the second equalization phase I'm using after all the processes that I've used before. Then I will look at one of the things that I taught you about, which is you're going to be referring to your reference track. You need to understand what your idea is regarding the stereo image or the spatial enhancement. Listen to your master track and try to figure out whether, if you compare to similar commercial tracks, whether it's something that your stereo image is too narrow, okay, or if you need more spatial, or is it too spread out, which can create a lot of phase issues, or something that is not acting as a unity. So there's a balance of everything. Too much stereo image is bad, and having almost a mono signal, it's also bad. So you need to say any type of genre has its own profile on how we would like to see. Orchestral music uses a lot of a good stereo field, but mastering an unplugged version of a guitar, and there's some sort of a stereo delay, be careful with that as well. So there are some plugins that I also teach it on my online course that you can use in order to manipulate, not just by equalization on the different bands, either the mid center or the side center, but also in the do spatial enhancement and checking phasing issues based on that. Next steps will be once we have to go into the process of pushing the volume of the track at the commercial levels. So we use a combination of what we call a maximizer and a limiting. The maximizer and the limiter, they work hand to hand in order to make sure that we can push the volumes at the loudness levels that are required per the commercial music. And obviously you're going to be looking at your reference track as well, and using limited in order to not to exceed the threshold. And lastly, you're going to be actually monitoring the output of that maximizing limiting and diagnosing with different metering options and format checks, such as the stereo field, the correlation curves, and the final loops and dynamic range that you have in your track after processing. So I want to share with you the general targets. These are not actually written in stone, but this is something that you want to take into account because have been verified, have been used in commercial music. There's a lot of conversations about loudness. There's a unit called LUFS, which is standard units for which humans perceive loudness, normalized based on the frequency range that we are talking about. You will see all kind of target range of LUFS based on what type of applications. Either it's streaming or some more aggressive like the club pop or disco, all that kind of things. Some of the distribution of digital music companies will have this level of standard that they're using, such as Spotify or YouTube, that will actually put you into a -14 LUFS. Okay, so if you're mixing higher than that, basically when you're trying to upload that, it will be depleted down to have an average of -14. That doesn't mean that you're going to be mixing or mastering for -14. What you're going to do is take the loudest portion of your song or your record, and you're going to analyze that for competitive loudness in that area, and then you will verify overall what the average LUFS you can get based on that, and you will manipulate the limiter based on that. Then the true peak is something that it's being used in order to avoid distortion when we are actually pushing the limiter to limits and we are approaching 0 decibels, which is the limit for which in the digital world we can actually have more than that in terms of loudness. So if you're having -1, I'm having typically -1, it's a safe because it's a full 1 decibel below the 0. And everything that is being limited out there, even with analog to digital conversion perspective, you will still be under 0 and you'll be okay. My recommendation is to go to define a true peak for the limiting of -1 dBTP. Dynamic range is a very genre specific, and I cannot give you guidance to that. It's just I put this overall things that we typically see in all type of genre music, very aggressive music with low dynamic range up to 6, up to 10, or even 14 or 15. We are talking about classic music. So this is something that you want to take into account. It's not a hard barrier, but take that into account because it will provide you an idea how compressed, how much punch you have in your track. Remember that when you're compressing too much, you may have a louder track, but the dynamic range will be lower, and you will start punchiness into that. Stereo imaging, we need it to be wide but mono compatible. My recommendation is to look at your preferred, mostly liked track that you want to, and try to compare that. There's also some plugins that I recommend in my online course about what you can use in order to compare all of these elements, such as lavs, stereo imaging, and punchiness, and everything. But essentially, the stereo imaging which should be wide but monocompatible. What does it mean? Monocompatible means that when you're running the final monitoring on your master bus, you have to have a phase correlation, of course, higher than 0. It should not be a negative number. Which means that there's some sort of a phase cancellation somehow. Of course, the optimal is +1. If you're having less than 0, means that when you're trying to convert a stereo track into a mono track, some of this information is being canceled out. And remember that when you're doing a mastering, you're not just doing mastering to be listened to in stereo environments. You can listen into the some mono devices, phones, and some other devices. The last thing I want to talk about is I provided a list here that you can check on in more details about minimal requirements for mastering stage in case that you're going to be doing only mastering. But in general, everything that we talked about with regards to mixing also applies. Whoever is doing mixing is a great starting point for starting the mastering process, other than probably more strict elements for acoustics, and also has something that has to do with the monitors selection and the headphones themselves. Also, there are dedicated plugins that are dedicated for mastering more than mixing. So you will, in my online course, I will recommend all the plugins that are good for mastering are recommended, and the ones that are for mixing. Some of the mixing are also good for mastering, but not the other way around. So basically, some of the plugins for mastering you want to look at is specialized mastering for an equalization, mastering compressor in a bus limiter, and loudness meter. The loudness meter that you can use, also a free software. It's called, it's a plugin basically. It's a Julian. You can download for free, and it will provide you all the data that you need in order to make the final decisions and the metering and the formal checks. And also a great suit that I use a lot is the Isotope Ozone. It's great because it has everything that you need for mastering. I provide here some recommendations, which is something that is something in the mid-range that you need to get decent mastering to. Make sure to understand the mastering is a process that requires a lot of attention. The mixing is different, but the mastering requires a lot of attention and focus. So make sure it gets familiar. You're going to grow into that, and you're going to make sure that every time that you mastering is going to be easier for you to identify the problematic areas, and you know exactly how to resolve them pretty fast. So I want to take some time here and talk about those who spent hours working on a track only to wonder why it still doesn't sound like the pros. And I know that frustration when your ideas feel right, but your mixers won't shine. It's not about talent. It's about not having a clear path. So that's why I created the complete method for music production. It's an online course, a step-by-step system designated or designed to help independent musicians turn ideas into professional sounding track. You learn the exact process the professionals use, from composition, arrangement, to mixing and mastering, all adapted for a home studio. My goal is to make that learning curve smoother for you, to take away that confusion and help you finally achieve the sound you've been chasing. I spent probably almost 2 years in this course because I want to make sure I tailor that exactly on what you need in order to get your music production skill moving forward. And I think it's a great tool that you want to have. That will be probably the next steps if you want to move forward, if you want to take seriously the music production process. So in those lines, I would like to present you with this complete method for music production. It's, as I said before, I have 25 years of experience, proven method, has been working, significantly been improving that throughout the years. Also, the great things about this online course is it's going to be a step-by-step. I will show you exactly what to do from the ground up, every single step, everything that we talked about, the pyramid, on the production of music. You will have it step by step, so you can actually follow up very easily. And also you will learn the principles to write, song, compose, and arrange music. We talked a little bit about that in the masterclass, but of course we didn't have the time to go into deep and all the composition methods and the type of arrangement of music and writing songs and so forth. You have that available. Also, I will provide you with a detailed analysis on how to set up your studio and the recording session, including the location of the equipment, the instrumentation, how we're going to be recording that, what type of recording strategy we're going to be using for each one of those instruments. Also, I will guide you through the audio processing tools using AI Assist, which is something that recently has been actually providing a lot of great results for me. Also, I will walk you through the mixing and the mastering process separately for a song from scratch. Basically, I start from scratch, and on a 2 hours video for mixing and also mastering later, I will explain and share with you what I'm doing exactly until I'm finished with those processes. So you will have a complete understanding exactly how I'm approaching based on the process I use in order to get those music production stages put together. And we talked about also the audio processing tools. I provided and worked on a full survey on all the plugins and the effects available in the market that I recommend using it. Something that I compiled for a few years now. And also whoever is using virtual instruments, my recommendations with using exactly what are the advantages of each and so forth. So basically for this complete method for music production, you're getting 17 hours of video showing and describing the processes I used. And in addition to that, you get almost 100 pages for download with detailed material for you to keep. You can download and keep that material for yourself, which will provide you a lot of background information you're going to need to support the classes. Also, today's market benchmarking, the evaluation and recommendation of plugins. This is something that it comes along with this course. And I will share with you my custom 20-step process I use for mixing, exactly what I'm doing. And you will see that in a form of flowchart explaining exactly what happens for each one of those steps. And I also set up with the students QA sessions, 6 for each module, which basically we can set up a one-on-one and go over the material and your questions and anything that you've done, and also to provide feedback on your work. At the end of the day, you will get official certification of course completion. What's actually the value of this? If you're looking on-site or either a content or a face-to-face course, it will cost you around $600 to $1,200, even using 3 credits on a university. But if you're looking at the mid-tier compressive online courses, it will range around $300 in the market today. So now the online course that I'm offering is right now, the normal price is $79. For the special pricing for this masterclass, is available for a limited number of enrollments, goes down to $59. And I'm providing the link of the course enrollment in the video description for you to check out. Go and take opportunity if you want to take advantage of that and take your music production skills to the next level, because you owe it to yourself. In addition to that, you get bonus items. I'm providing you also with the free audio processing fundamentals bundle. It's a mixing module bonus that I generated myself, which is a $29.90 value. And also I will share with you my free ebook for music production answers that you will get, which talks a little bit more about the masterclass today with more details, for a $499 value. And as I said before, the coordination of the 6 live Q&A sessions you're going to have, which is a value of $54 in the market. All in all, taking into account the market value, you're getting into a $389, which basically now with the offer for this masterclass, it's only $59. So you're saving $329.89, which is, I think it's a great opportunity to move forward, and you will really enjoy and learn a lot of things that you need. So I encourage you, go to the description of this video and you will find the link over there. And of course, this purchase, it's covered by a 100% satisfaction guaranteed. It will be an unconditional 15 days money back guarantees, no questions asked. Okay, we have reached the completion of this masterclass. I really hope that I provide you a good starting point for you to start looking at this type of things. Typically, there's a very narrow perspective for most of the musicians to look at technical aspect of that, whereas the most important things is to look the whole picture and the concept of the music production that I talked to you about. Will provide you a good idea as a starting point for you to develop as a music producer or a DIY musician. And anything that has to go with potential questions or comments, I will be very glad that you are able to provide comments or feedback on this. This will help me to learn also from your comments and your questions. And of course, I will be reviewing your comments and responding to that. And I will see you soon in our next adventure for more music production information that I can provide you with. Thank you very much, and talk to you soon.